Pharisees? No? There would be. I still want to go. I'd go. I want to go there and teach. I want to go to Africa too, but they said it's not safe for me to go over to Africa and where I want to go because white people are being kidnapped. Nigeria. Yeah. Okay, so for those of you who did just now got in and heard what I just said, oh, it was a good conversation. Too bad you missed it. All right. I hope the lighting is better because now I have a ring light that someone sent me. So giving that good. And it's supposed to have. What'd you say? What's what's what did my wife say? What'd you say?
It's a makeup light.
Something makeup light.
It's a makeup light.
No, it's for camera work.
Whatever helps you sleep at night.
That's what it is. And
it makes you look marvelous.
yeah, I thought she said, you need a lot more light or it's not working or something.
It's really good for your TikTok videos.
TikTok videos. There you go. Whew, man, it's a rough crowd tonight. I'm going to have to use some people here as a sign of, or as an example of sin. Looking back at people. That's what I've done. I've threatened my friends. I said, you be careful. I'll use you as an example in a sermon. And it won't be good. So, like my brother says, you're getting close. All right, we're going to go to Ruth 2, but we're going to pray first. And we'll just jump in. All right. Like the makeup light. Lord Jesus, comments. Lord Jesus, thank you for today. And just ask, Lord, for your blessing on the study. Let's ask your blessing on your word, Lord, in our hearts and our minds. Lord, please teach us. And may we learn from the second chapter of Ruth. And we just ask for your blessing. We ask it in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, Ruth 2. Starting at verse 1, we've got 23 verses to go through. And you guys enjoying the Ruth study so far? Yeah. Okay. All right. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So this is important because notice the word kinsman. Ruth is, the book of Ruth has a typological leaning towards what's called the Kinsman Redeemer. Boaz is a kinsman, means he's a relative. The Kinsman Redeemer, he's going to, so to speak, redeem Ruth. Jesus is our Kinsman Redeemer. And so he redeems us. This is where the typology comes in, but nevertheless. So families in the Old Testament were very, very united by the ties of blood. So wife, husband, children, cousins, and the further out it went, the weaker those bonds were, because you can't have a strong bond with 18 generations or once removed over there. But the idea is that very close bonds are there, and so there's a lot of familial protection as well that would go on. So if you were to insult somebody, this is kind of related. It's called the Apoditic Law. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The reason that was there because in this culture of very strong family ties, if I were to, punch somebody in the eye, give them a fat lip, well, then their brother, that person's brother, might punch me in the mouth, give me a fat lip, or break a tooth. Well, my brother, oh, you broke my brother's tooth. Now I'm going to go break your arm. Oh, now I'm going to break both your legs. And it was called an escalation. It's called blood revenge. So an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a burn for a burn, what the Bible talks about. So it's called the Apoditic Law. It was intended to be a cessation of the escalation of blood revenge. That's all that is. So anyway, familial ties were very important, and they extended along with reputations. If you had a familial obligation, family obligation to your brother's wife, and you did not meet that, it was a shame upon you and your household. A very serious thing in that culture. Now we just say, I don't care. I got other friends that watch TV. But not so then, because families were interrelated and they were part of the covenant community, and they had to work and live with each other in basically an agrarian society. And so one person might say, can I borrow your ox? Yes. Can I have water out of your well? Yes. And you had a mutual exchange. So family relationships were very practical as well. Nevertheless, and Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So we've already gone over this. Levitical laws required reapers in the fields to harvest time to leave portion of the crop for the poor. This is out of Leviticus 19:9 and 10. Now, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap at the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest, nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger. I am Yahweh your Elohim. I am the Lord your God. So he is saying what God is doing is providing for the needy. And now notice what's going on here. God doesn't say go redistribute your wealth to them and make sure that it's all equity, and then teach your children in schools crap. No, what it was is God would provide in their station, in their situation, and they were to do what they had to do and could do in that place. But ultimately, we were to help one another, and people were to be brought up. There was in level. And also, when they would sell land, every 49 years, the land would fall back into the ownership of the original family member. There were a lot of provisions in the Jewish law to take care of people, and this is just one of them, the gleanings of the fields. So it's part of God's covenant with his people, and God cares for his people and provides for his people in his sovereignty. And since Ruth has adopted the God of Israel, because she said earlier, your God will be my God. She's adopted the God of Israel. Because of this, she's now under covenant faithfulness of God. He's going to protect her, he's going to help, and he's going to provide. Now, a lot of times what we might say is, well, this woman now has lost her husband, and her sisters-in-laws have now gone back to the Moabite land, and she's going with Naomi. And there's a hint that Naomi didn't really like her in Hebrew, but we won't get into that. And so she's going to a foreign land. Why isn't it that God just didn't, just take care of her, have a lot of money be delivered to her, and she can buy her own house, everything's fine, and a stream just starts flowing through the backyard, and everything's good? Well, it doesn't work like that. God, what he does is he uses providence. He provides through situations. And we've all got stories in our lives of how, well, God, why don't you try this? I got some suggestions for God. And then you look back on your life, you go, I'm glad he didn't listen to me. And you know that God was taking care of things anyway. We all have those kinds of stories. And it's important that we understand, because in light of the heresy of name it and claim it, where God is supposed to make you healthy and wealthy, and that if you don't have health and wealth, that means you're out of the will of God. Not necessarily. In Exodus 4:11, God makes the eye blind, the ear deaf, the tongue dumb. He's the one who does these things. And he's the one who's sovereign. And our job is to be subservient to God and his will in the situation and the station that we're in. I often, lately, I don't know why, but I forgot where, just incidentally, I've been seeing some things. I've been watching a lot of YouTube stuff where women are marrying guys, and this one woman I remember watching, she's from Australia. What she's doing is trying to save 60% of their income by turning off the lights, by not using the water this way, by saving the coupons over here and doing this. And she's really working hard to do that. She made a video on this. It was interesting. And so I remember thinking, she's nice looking. She could have gotten a richer guy. She could have, maybe, I don't know. But she was in this situation, and she was content, so to speak, to be in that situation, do what's necessary in that situation, and work through it. And then so Anik's like that too. When we got married, she did not believe, my wife Anik, she did not believe that we would ever own a home, because I'm going into ministry, right? And, as I jokingly say to people, I went into ministry for two things: women and money. I got one woman, and she got my money. And that's a joke I tell, but there were times when we were we had a single $15 check. I remember this once, and we had to decide how to divvy up $15. Food, gas, diapers, whatever it was. And she didn't complain. She stood there and stood with it in the situation that she was in, and I did too. That we were in our context, and we worked through that context. And we all know that. I'm saying things, you all got your issues. We all have our things. But this is important for Christians because we need to be satisfied with where we're at. Just as Paul said, I know how to be, shipwrecked and with famine and with beatings and with not having shelter, sleeping out in the dark of the depth of the water 2 nights, all this kind of stuff. He's not complaining. Why is it that God then allows these things to happen to us, and yet he somehow provides through it? And how many times could you look back in your life where you say, you know what? It came that close to us losing everything. And how many times did it happen? Well, about 20. Did God come through each time? Well, yeah. But here's number 21. And now it's different. Well, why is it, well, now number 22, and so we have to learn to trust God. We have to learn that he does provide for us because he does love us. And anyway, Ruth is like this, that she is trusting the God of Israel. She's adopted him. She's trusting that he will provide. And so she says, can I go out into the field and glean? That's a provision. It is a form of begging, but it's not. But it's going in and taking the leftovers of the reapers. The reapers were generally males because it was harder work of taking plants, cutting, lifting, moving in the hot sun for hours and hours. And women would be back there making sandwiches. Of course, sandwich hadn't been invented yet, so that wouldn't work. Dang it. Okay. So anyway, but Ruth is not demanding, and she's humble in her words. That is something that's really interesting. Please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain for one in whose sight I may find favor. And she said, go, my daughter. So Ruth is not demanding, but she's humble. Now, that humility in this particular woman, in this situation, is a crown because of her humility to trust God, not saying, you didn't provide this, you don't provide that. It's we'll trust God together kind of attitude to move forward. That's a good woman. And God's gracious providence does not override human decisions either. He certainly can. But in this situation, the providence is that there was famine, death, and moving back. And now she's got to go out and get leftover food in fields. That's pretty tough, isn't it? That's pretty tough. And here she is through it, trusting in God. That's a good woman. All right, verse 3. So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the family of Elimelech. So in Deuteronomy 24:21, when you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not go over it again. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. Now, the alien means a non-Jew. So even those who are not, they're traveling through this area. You got to understand something. If you think about Israel, where Israel's located, there's a slightly important geographical significance to this. So looking this way, Israel's over here, Mediterranean, and here's Italy, right there, right? Well, in order to get from Africa to there, unless you went through the risky business of taking a boat across the Mediterranean, which could take days, and sudden storms could come up and you could drown. It was risky, but anyway, what you did was traveled through Israel to go up here because over here was deserts, and down here was desert, up here was desert, and there was this green strip of land. And so, in order to go from here to there like that, this area of Israel was often the place you had to go through. That's why God put them there. So that when the gospel would be sent out, it was already geographically in a very significant location where the roads from Rome had already been developed, and where it would be dispersed. It was called the diaspora. When the persecution came in 70 AD of Israel, they dispersed because they weren't going out to do what they're supposed to be doing. God had to intervene and disperse them. So this bit of Israel here, right there, geographically is pretty important. So the geography actually plays an important part of that whole thing. And so the aliens, the orphans and the widows, that means the non-Jews would be there too. Why? Because it was an important geographical transportation area where it was. Okay. That's why the Romans, remember, from there to Italy was, 1,000 miles. That's a big deal. Now for us, 2-day trip, right? In a car, air conditioning, while we're sipping on our lattes and GPS and we're listening to radio and things like that. Them, you get on a donkey or you walk in the heat. So it was quite a deal. Anyway, nevertheless, number 4, verse 4. Now, behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "May the Lord be with you." What was that? It was who? It was you? That was my phone because it sounded like it was from here.
But it was you. I put on your live stream.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. It sounded like my phone. So notice it says Bethlehem. Now, where did Jesus come from? Bethlehem. And Bethlehem, does anybody know what that word means? Bethlehem, house of bread. Okay. Jesus is the bread of life, right? Anyway, no big deal. But may the Lord be with you. And they said to him, "May the Lord bless you." So Boaz was saying to the reapers, "May the Lord be with you." And they said, "May the Lord bless you." Now, generally in that culture, the landowners did not really have much dealings with the reapers. They usually had a guy who was the steward, who would relay the orders of the landowner to the workers. And this is the case in the parable of the steward who said, he's a bad guy. "How much you owe? $100? Merit right for 50. Quick, quick, quick." Which is an interesting story. But they will do parables sometime too. So it means that Boaz is a good guy. He's not so uppity that he won't talk to the reapers. And he says, "May the Lord be with you." So he's a good man. He wants them to be blessed, and they return the blessing. Now in Islam, there's a phrase in Arabic. I forgot. I used to don't know it. And then you'd say it, and then in Muslim they say it. It's like, "The Lord bless you, may you be blessed." It's like this. I used to know it. I forgot. Yes, it is. What does it say it again? Alayhi salam, and then alaykum salam. Yeah, that's right. Peace with you. And so it's not that they're correct in everything because they're Muslims, but the issue is that in that culture, that whole area, it's just part of the cultural norm that's passed around and it's even to this day. So, so this is the only place in the book of Ruth where the phrase "Lord be with you" occurs in that form. But it does occur in the Bible. In the NASB, I did a search on it. It occurs in Exodus 10:10, 1 Samuel, blah blah blah, and a total of 8 times in the Bible, and it occurs once in 2 Thessalonians 3:16 and 2 Timothy 4:22, but used in different contexts. I like to see things come up to the number 7, the number 8, the number 12, because I think there's spiritual meaning in them. I look for things, and it's interesting to talk about, and I have issues. So, okay. Verse 5, then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers. Whose young woman is this? See? The servant who's in charge of the reapers, right? So he would normally just address the servant who was in charge of them. But, he said to the reapers, "How are you doing? May Lord may you be blessed." He says, "Who is this young woman?" Or actually, whose young woman is this? Now, that's what it actually says. Now, that's culturally significant. We don't say that. Whose woman are you? Unless we're kind of going to tweak them, What man do you belong to, woman? And you get slapped for that. But in this culture, women they were tied to husbands and tied to families. And so whose women, who's under whose protection, not that they were owned, it wasn't it, but it's a phrase and an understanding. Well, whose woman, I'm of the house of whatever, of this house. And it was always a man's name. And that's who we're with. So that's what's going on there. Verse 6, the servant in charge of the reapers replied, "She is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab." Now, apparently, Boaz took an interest in those who worked in the field, and he didn't recognize Ruth. Okay, just checking. He's there. Possibly they could have said, "Hey, there's a woman out there from the Moabites, from your family Elimelech," and he went out. Could have. We don't know. Could have been. He could have just been that he's a great guy. He's talking to them, checking on things, seeing how things are going. Hey, who's that? That kind of a thing. Maybe she's a hot babe, a hot Moabitess babe. Who knows? I don't know. Moabites, was it MoabitesBrides.com? I think it's still around. I don't know. You can see. Good sandwiches. That's right. That's right. Okay. Now, verse 7. And she said, "Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." Thus she came and has remained from the morning until now. She's been sitting in the house for a little while. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids." Does anybody know what a sheaf is? I had to look it up. Sheaf is singular, and sheaves is plural. Now, there's a song, a hymn, bringing in the sheaves. So I had to look it up. Went, oh, that's what that is. Anybody know?
Bundles of grain.
Very good. Bundles of grain. And they were often shaped in an hourglass form. They'd take a big bundle and they would wrap the center, and then they would toss them, they move them. That's what it was. So bring in the sheaf. And this was often, taking like wheat, for example. When you have the grain in the heads, well, if you throw things, sometimes those grains would break off and fall to the ground. People go pick these things up and they could use them, and they would gather them, and they would often toss them into the air and the wind would blow and take the husks away. The grain would fall, and then they would roast the grains, and they would have some food to eat. And so he says, "Please," she says, "please let me glean and gather after the reapers." So she knows that the reapers are to go in and do their job, and there's going to be leftover. Thus she came and has remained from the morning until now. This is what the servant said to Boaz. She's been sitting in the house for a little while. And Boaz said, "Listen carefully, my daughter." Well, that's interesting. My daughter is a sign of familial respect, of affection. Now, some could say that it might mean that he was like a grandfather and called her a daughter, or old enough to be her dad and called her daughter. Not necessarily. Often people who were in positions of authority, land ownership, and someone slightly younger, they'd say, could say it as a respectful, loving, caring way, "my daughter," and it was a good thing. And plus, in the culture, older men often married women 10, 20 years younger than them, and it wasn't uncommon at all. So Ruth is a foreigner in Israel. But the people of God have been told not to marry the inhabitants of the land that was taken in conquest. And Deuteronomy 7 talks about this. But yet, Elimelech, the relative of Boaz, had gone to the Moabite land, in a sense, turning his back on Yahweh, married Moabitess. All the males died. That's a curse. The men died and the sons died, not the daughters. This is the judgment of God. They come back to that land. Naomi comes back, calls me Mara, bitter. And then she brings Ruth, a Moabitess. One of the things I wonder about is that when she said, "Go back to your land," might have been because I don't want to bring a Moabitess back with me. It just make it all the worse. I don't know if that's the case, but it's a possibility. But nevertheless, Ruth is with her, and Ruth is committed to stay with her. Now, the Jews were pretty generous because they had these laws of gleaning, and aliens in the land are ordered to take care of them. So, they're not going to hate them. And the Bible does say, "Love your neighbor." Now, in that culture, though, they mostly, by that time, had thought that their neighbor meant the fellow Jews, not everybody else, which is why Jesus in the Good Samaritan has the guy who's unconscious and naked, because you can't tell who he is by his dress or his speech. So he could be anybody. That's why that's significant. So here they had the idea that Anyway, Ruth was from another land, and she could risk some ostracization, being ridiculed, being shunned a little bit, but not the case. Boaz goes right in and he's protecting her. Now, a lot of times men are pretty protective of women and other people's women in a respectful way, but they're often very protective. Men will open up doors for ladies and pick up this. Like I went to Costco with Anik yesterday, and we had to take two different cars, and I got there after her, and I saw this lady, maybe 70 something, and she's unloading stuff out of her cart, and it looked like a big heavy container of something underneath. I said, "Man, would you like me to take care of that for you? I'd lift it up for you." She goes, "Sure, Sonny." And so I lifted it up, put it in the thing, and she goes, "Oh, thank you so much, you're a gentleman." Actually, that was another lady who said that when I took her cart. An elderly lady goes, "Let me take your cart for you." And so the idea here is, taking care of and providing for. It's kind of something we kind of do that. And so I think there's some of that there. Plus, maybe she was just kind of cute. Maybe she was also the wife of the relative. He might have been aware of his kinsman redeemer obligation, or to some degree of what that is. And since she had been married to his relative's son, then there's a responsibility that kind of extends into that family. And he may very well have been aware of that and decided to act on it. And in part of this, when Anik's dad, her father has passed away since, married another woman after his first wife passed away, I felt an obligation to some degree to take care of her. And we've since moved away and lost contact. That's a whole other issue. But the idea is, because it's family and extended family, we're to do that. We are to take care of one another, and particularly in family relationships. And that's how it should be, right? And this is much here. Anyway, all right, verse 12. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. So now what Boaz is saying is, you come to take refuge under the Lord God, and you are the one who's trusting. That's good. And so by the promise that God has identified in himself covenantally to deliver people, he does this through people. Yeah, we want the heavens to open up and that bag of gold drop down from the heaven, problem solved. No, it's the neighbor down the road who comes over to help you build. It's you going over to help someone do something. God uses us to accomplish the good that he wants others to benefit from. That's why it says, love God and love your neighbor. We are to love our neighbors. We're to help them. We're to serve them. And how that's done is dependent on our situations, our abilities, disabilities, locations, and things like that. But we are to help one another. And as I've said this, I do not like helping people move. It's one of my least favorite things on the planet to do, because I have a deformed fourth lumbar vertebra, and I only have about 2 hours in me before my back starts seizing up. But I'll go help it anyway, because they need help. And it's just a couple hours, and I have a good excuse when I want to quit. So it's legit. And so I go and I help people because so what? It's an inconvenience. Yeah, so it's all right. Years ago, there was a lady in the church, and she's moving, and found out, and I knew right away. Here I go. I said, "Do you have anybody helping you move?" She goes, "No, just my children and me." I said, "Well, how about if I come over? And I'll just ask my friends if anybody wants to come over. We know you've got some big furniture, and we can move it for you." She goes, "Okay." And another guy and I came over. We worked about 3 hours, and it was great, And she said there was a free refrigerator she was getting rid of. And she said, "Well, there's this place supposed to come and get this refrigerator. But they're not coming here, so you can have it." I said, "Well, thank you. It's very nice." But I knew she didn't have much. I said, "I tell you what, I'd rather buy it from you." And so we arranged a little. I called Neek and I told her, and she goes, "Yeah, it's fine. Just do it that way." So I have a refrigerator, and the idea is not to take advantage. I'm not trying to boast. It's just, come on, we do those kind of things, right? You want to help people out. And these are the things that come from God because we want to honor God with what we already have. So we help people and we serve them and we don't want to take advantage of them. We don't want to do that. As a boss, because I run the Carm as a ministry, there are people that are under me in my authority, and I want them to be taken care of. And so I'll call them up. How are you doing? How's things going? You have any pressing needs? Can I pray for this or pray for that? And there's a situation or two where I know things are difficult for somebody. Well, maybe they might accidentally get a bonus or something because we want to take care of people. And I'm one of the few guys who actually says, I want you to be paid more. I want you to have more. And we have people who help me out with freebies and things like that. We've got a web designer right now who's helping out. We've already paid him. And he continues to work for us. And I've said, we're going to put you on a retainer. And he said, man, we'll talk about that later. He's a Christian. And so you can see how things are helping. This is how we're supposed to be in the body of Christ. That's how we're supposed to be in the body of Christ. So when I need my roof redone, I'll just mention it carefully. Because I'm afraid of heights. I can't get up there. So I'll get my supervisor's cap and say, yeah, that's right up there. That's right. Okay.
Unless you're responsible for the roof afterwards.
As long as I'm not. That's right. That's right. There's some shingles. There aren't anymore. You just kind of threw some down. That's right. So verse 13, I found favor in your sight, my Lord. And notice what she calls him, my Lord. This is interesting because Sarah called Abraham Lord. And then in 1 Peter 3, I think it's verse 6, Peter's talking about the marriage relationship and talks about the wife calling, or Sarah calling Abraham Lord, not as in Jesus is Lord, but in the headship issue. It is interesting because it kind of plays in here. She's recognizing the authority, position, and respect that man is due. And she calls herself your maidservant. She's a very humble woman. She knows her place in the culture and the time. He knows his place in the culture and the time and his obligations that go with both. He's not just being lackadaisical. I believe he recognizes who she is according to Elimelech, and he's stepping in. He may not want to, but he's doing this. But this is how it is with a lot of us. Verse 14, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here, that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. So she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. Now, come here and eat of the bread with the billet, with the reapers. That means it's a gathering. Often what would happen in a gathering is people would just blab. They would just talk. But when there's a chief, an important person of the community, like Boaz, who owned land and could direct servants who had reapers, then a lot of times what they would do is listen to them just talk. They'd get up and say something because they're the BMOC, big man on campus, right? They're the ones, and they would talk. So it's often a gathering like this, and this kind of a situation was one of him displaying his importance, not in a braggadocious way, because it was kind of expected for him to get up and say something maybe, or sit down and they would sit, that kind of a thing. And notice what it says. He says, come here that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of vinegar in bread in the vinegar. And we'll talk about the vinegar here in a little bit. So she sat beside the reapers, and he, Boaz, served her roasted grain. Wait a minute. This guy is now serving her. Everybody's seeing this. Nobody's going to mess with her now, right? He's showing her favor. You better do the same thing. He's taking care of her. And it's interesting that he serves her food. And he came from Bethlehem. Anyway, so she sat beside the reapers and did this. Now, the meal of bread and wine, that's usually vinegar mixed with oil, was supplemented with parched grain, in this case barley, roasted over a fire. Ruth sat with the reapers and was given her own portion of the harvest, some of which she saved for Naomi. I get this out of a commentary. So in Matthew 27:48, immediately one of them ran and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine, vinegar, and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. There's mentions of little things that are similar to Jesus and stuff worth noting. Sour wine is oxos in Greek. Sharp wine, vinegar used to be cheap, uh, poor wine, which was mixed with water, common drink, especially for the poorer classes and soldiers. Mingled with myrrh or bitter herbs, it was given to persons about to be executed in order to stupefy them. It would have an alcoholic effect, and it would stupefy them. So, a lot of leftists are drinking this stuff all the time. Stupidify. That's what I was thinking. Okay, that's a different word. Verse 15, when she rose to glean, Boaz commanded his servants, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not insult her. Oh, wait a minute. That means the sheaves that are bound up and stacked, she can take out of that. Okay, so now everybody knows she's favored by Boaz, and hands off, and she's kind of protected. And not only, this is an issue of protection, but not only is he's providing for her, but it's also a form of incidental protection to her. A woman without a man was vulnerable, because if she was accosted, who was to deal with the issue? Nobody. So if she's married, and say you guy pushed a woman down, whatever, the husband's going to go talk to him. You do that again, or whatever it is, go behind the shed, let's have a conversation. It was a serious thing. But if there's no man to protect her, she can be taken advantage of by less than scrupulous individuals. But this is extending his safety net over her by serving her and then telling her, let her go in and take the reap among the sheaves. That's a level above the general gleaning. Now, verse 16, you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from among the bundles and leave it so that she may glean and do not rebuke her. So now he's instructing the reapers, take some out, the good stuff, and leave it. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. So she beat it out, different ways of extracting the grain from the staff. Now, just so you guys know, an ephah is about 1/10 of a homer, which is about 2/3 of a bushel, which is also corresponding to one bath. Okay, hope that clears everything up for you. Clears mud? Okay. And so let me read that again because I like that. When I researched it, I went, oh, that's helpful. An ephah is 1/10 of a homer, which also is about 2/3 of a bushel, which corresponds, the ephah, to about one bath. Okay, so I had to find some commentary that would put it into normal English, and I found something. Josephus was a Jewish historian, commentator, 60, 70, 80, 90 AD. And he said ephah was about had it converted, 9.25 gallons. So if you have, 9 gallons of liquid, that's about how much it was. But was probably, the commentary said, more likely 5.8 gallons. So just say 6 gallons. So an ephah is about 6 gallons. So that's pretty substantial. It's not by weights, by volume. A gleaner got what was left over, and she was able to get quite a bit. So she was also, there's some weight to this too. Not that it was like 800 pounds and she's hefting it, but there's some substantial weight. And, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds kind of a thing. Who knows? But one commentator said that Ruth gleaned about 50 pounds of grain. How would any of you, men included, like to carry 50 pounds of something down the road?
Make it about 6 feet and fall on my face.
6 feet? Okay, that's pretty good. I can push it about 7 or 8. Okay, so I'm more macho than you. How about you, Rich? Let's see what the Miss Braggy.
It's funny because we were working this last weekend and we
Yeah.
had 50-pound bags.
50-pound bags?
And I'm picking it up.
Yeah.
Geez, carry around this all day, and I'm thinking I pretty much do.
It gets heavy
But
quickly.
it does get heavy very fast.
Yeah. So picking up 50 pounds for us is not that hard. For men, it's not that hard to pick it up. I can pick up 50 pounds and walk it. It doesn't take very long for your body to say, not much further. The first 5 seconds is doable, but now after 5 minutes, you're going to be crying for mommy, you know? And so she's got 50 pounds. It doesn't say how she got it back. Did she carry it or did she have someone help her? Who knows? But anyway, she got about 50 pounds of stuff. And it's possible that she carried it. They had those yoke things that you put on and balance 50, 25 pounds, and they could carry stuff. Who knows? I don't know. But it doesn't say. Verse 18, she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also took it out and gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied. So she took it up and went into the city. So she carried it. She brought it there. Now, it doesn't say that she, might have borrowed an animal or someone might have helped, but it does say she. So we'll just leave it at that. She's probably pretty buff. Maybe that's why Boaz didn't want to mess with her. 50 pounds of stuff. Well, I'm not messing with her. I can make sure she's okay. Who knows? That would be the slick commentary. Not very good and reliable. But anyway, so she took it, gave it to Naomi. In verse 19, her mother-in-law then said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where did you work?" It's kind of an interesting way. Why did she just say, "Where did you glean?" But I think it's a Jewish thing. Where did you glean and where did you work? I don't know why it's double, but it's what it is. May he who took notice of you be blessed. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed of the Lord who has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and to the dead." That's a reference to the family, right, who passed away. Again, Naomi said to her, "The man is our relative. He is one of our closest relatives." So now we're talking about the issue of the kinsman redeemers coming in, because I don't know how much Ruth would have known about the responsibilities in the Jewish community. Maybe she did by then. Maybe she'd heard about it because the Moabite area was not too far from Jerusalem, a few days' walk. So it's possible that she would have understood the kinsman redeemer requirement. Who knows? So Naomi recognizes the hand of the Lord and she calls for God to bless him. Though the Lord is the one in control and has arranged for Ruth to go to Boaz's field, free will and responsibility are not negated by the grace and design of God. Instead of God's grace leading to no free will, it leads to free will. This is a doctrinal issue of predestination, middle knowledge, counterfactuals, and then we can get into the different kind of free will stuff. We'll get into it. Okay, because eyes are glazing over. Then Ruth, the Moabitess, said, "Furthermore, he said to me, you should stay close to my servants until they have finished all my harvest." Ruth said, "Stay close to no." Said Ruth, and Ruth, Moabitess said, "Furthermore, he said to me, you should stay close to my servants until they have finished all my harvest." Okay, so that means she can go back. The harvest isn't done in one day. There's a lot of work. So normally, here's a nice, interesting tidbit of information. Normally, the wheat harvest took place about a month later than the barley harvest. Traditionally, the wheat harvest ended in the Feast of Weeks, 7 weeks prior to the barley harvest began. Just trivia, interesting information. Hey, we're almost done. Look at this. We're going through this. This is good stuff. Verse 22, Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his maids, so that others do not fall upon you in another field." So remember I talked about the safety that was there. She said, "It's good, my daughter, that you go out with his maids, so that others do not fall upon you in another field." Fall upon you means attack you. And so it was just, she's saying, stick with him and that family. You'll be protected. You're okay. There were bad people back then, and women needed to have men protect them. It's one of the reasons women would not go out on their own, generally speaking. If they did go out, they would go in groups. And it was acceptable for women to go into groups because several women could take a guy, hit him, jump him, do it, whatever. Now, if you think about that, the woman who went by herself in John 4 to the well, by herself, had 5 husbands. And there's a relationship between the 5 husbands and 5 historical events with the Samaritans, but I don't know what they are. I heard about it. I got to do more research. And so, incidentally, I always brag. I drank out of that very well. I just got to brag that very well, that of John 4. I did. But very well. Yeah, that's right. Aren't you envious? As you'd like to? Good, I'm glad. So she's concerned, of course, for her safety, as is Boaz, as the family. So verse 23, so she stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. So that was quite a while, several weeks. And she lived with her mother-in-law. So this chapter ends with the reference of the harvest, the same way chapter 1 ended with the reference of the harvest. Now, I could take a little bit of a tangent and go over to Matthew 13, where Jesus says, allow the the wheat and the tare, and at the end of the harvest, I'll say to the reapers, first gather up the tares. The word harvest is used in an agrarian sense, but also in an eschatological sense. Eschatology being the study of end times. So in the chapter 1, the context of the harvest was being alone, sad, and poor. Here, it's hope, comfort, and provision. There's been a drastic improvement through her situation. But this is important. The situation was improved, not miraculously, but providentially. God provides through other people. God provides through the sunshine. He provides through the rain. The grain took time to grow. The harvesters had to come in. There had to be people who would do the harvest, who would leave stuff on the ground, accidentally or on purpose. Then they had to go in, work themselves in that land, in that day, and get the gleanings in order to eat. This is God's providence. It's God providing. Work is good. That's why I don't believe in retirement. I don't believe in retirement for Christians. I believe you simply change what you do. If you work for 20 years and you retire, we get it. You get a pension, you get whatever, hopefully, see how long that goes. And then you go do something else to serve God. That's what you should do. Now, as we get older, we have a lot less ability and we can't do as much. I get that. But the idea is that we should be using our talents and our abilities to serve, to love God and love our neighbor. So I'll be 65 next month. That's supposed to retire. I've been working on CARM for 26 years. 26 years. Do you think that's 26 years with a company? I could retire now at 65? I could. There's no possible way that I'm ever going to do that unless I get to the point, which my Nick will go, it's not far off, where I'm not too mentally with it anymore, and it's time to lay low. We understand that happens at the end of our lives. Why would anybody want to retire? See, she's ready to say something. Are you going to say something? Like it's happening already? You're not going to say that? You want to say that, but I was going to say that. But the thing is that God provides through us, but he provides through us through our own hands. He provides through us through our own work. And, I got a story. I could tell you, big story. So could you. You got stories where how God provides. It would be kind of cool one time. We have a Bible study where each person takes 5 minutes and talk about how God provided. And, the things that are unusual. Maybe we could do that after we finish Ruth. We can just do one last one and then take a Christmas break or something. I think it'd be kind of fun. Yeah. I don't know if you want to do it because I don't know if your stories are any good.
I'll work on them.
You work on them? See, I'm taking a shot at him right away. He's smiling. They're smiling. I think it'd be good. You guys want to do that?
Yeah.
Be just a testimony of how God has provided. Okay, good. So in chapters 1 and 2, we've seen the grace of God in the provision that God has worked through circumstances that you wouldn't normally think were part of God's sovereign plan. Just as Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, God used it to bring the people into Egypt and save them. And in Genesis 50:20, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So it's a very interesting statement. When they sold Joseph into slavery, and later it all comes out, and he talks to his brothers, he says, you meant it for evil, God meant it for good. God's hand was in that very thing. We have to understand it's important that God often brings about something to us that for a while seems to be quite bad. And yet it's what God has designed for us to bring us through it in order for something greater. And a lot of times we won't know what that greater thing is if we haven't gone through the valley of difficulty, the shadow of death that looms across us. We often don't know how great the sunshine is until we've been in the darkness for so long. And what this does is it breaks our hearts. It humbles our hearts. I'd like to, say, God, please humble me. If I ask that, do you think God's going to open up the heavens, reach down with his heart, his finger, you're now humble? Yes, I would say I am, but I can't. It's not going to happen like that. He's going to say, okay, be humble, serve that person. I don't want to serve that person. Now you're serving that. So God uses circumstances to teach us and to shape us. That's why in our circumstances, we have to praise God and thank him. Say, God, what is your will in this? So each morning, almost every morning I get up, I sit down at my desk before I start working and say, Lord, please use me today. Fill my heart with words, direct my hands, direct my footsteps, that I might be used of you. I pray, and then I go to work. It's quick. I don't spend 8 hours there. It's just not me. But I pray. I want to serve God. And so if certain things happen during the day, now I'm learning. Certain things happen that mess up my schedule. It's okay. It's okay. And here's a quick example of something. When 4 months ago, when Anik was down in LA with our daughter had a medical emergency. A medical emergency. I had to get down there. So I think, I don't know, but it was like noon was when I found out. I was flying out at 4:00. It was that fast. And I literally sat on the plane, and the guy behind me goes, hey, Matt. And I look, and he pulled his mask down. It's a guy at the radio station who used to work there when I was here at the radio station here. I said, wow, how you doing, man? Oh, how's it going? And I said, what are you doing? What are you flying down? He goes, oh, my mom's in the hospital. Really? What hospital? The same hospital I was going to. And I said, well, maybe we can share an Uber or something. He said, no, my sister's going to pick me up. I rode with them, with her sister. They dropped me off so God provides sometimes through some weird stuff, doesn't he? What are the odds, right? There are weird things that happen sometimes. We've got stories like this where God just provides. I was there within like 5 or 6 hours from the call, 1,100 miles away. Yeah. I walked in with all my luggage and the whole bit, and there it was. God provides. And we got to look and say, think, you're going to provide today. So yesterday, I was all set to do some research and some writing, and Nick calls me up. She's at Costco, blah, 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 blah. I go, okay, I'll go down there. I met her down there, and we spent some time. And you know what? It was fine. Of course, no complaints. But I was like, me, like, I got to work. I got to research. No, I got to do something else. And I ended up enjoying that and having a good time. And what?
Alan was there.
I didn't see him. I didn't see him. Remember, you said, do you see him? I said, no. And so she got to see the same guy from the plane. It was the same guy from the plane who sat behind me. She got to see him. And then, so how it worked was she had her car, I had my car, we're getting all the groceries. She takes off and goes home, and she's over to go like this. And I had to take all the groceries and go. And you know what? It's a privilege to be able to serve. And it was fine. There's so many different ways that things happen. We need to look at our lives and say, Lord, what have you got for me today? And maybe it's getting derailed from a project, getting sent in a different direction. And I'm learning more and more to say, what have you got in this? Before, no, I have to do this because it's my plan. It's a little arrogant. But now, Lord, what have you got in this? What have you got in this? So, God's providence is really throughout this whole message, this whole thing, God's providence providing, and yet at the same time, it's through our own hands and our own works, our own decisions, and yet He provides. And we trust God, we move forward, and a lot of times it doesn't look real good. And we just keep going through it, and it works out. And we get to praise God. So the next time something happens, we're less likely to moan and groan. We're more likely to say, well, let's see what God does. And that's one of the things we've learned. When things don't work out, I'll tell Neek, good, something's going to happen. Right, Neek? Normally she'd be throwing things and, say, where's your AK-47? I'm going to go talk to them. Honey, let's just wait, And so, it's just like that. And then she wants to go by the grenade store. No. Let's just see what happens. And so things work out better. And she goes, yeah, that's right. So the next chapter, I'll stop rambling insensibly. The next chapter will bring us face to face, more so with Boaz. It'll be interesting to see what he's like and what some cultural things are in there. All right?
Good.
Good? Okay, good. Any questions? Yeah, that's right. Ruth seeks for marriage with Boaz in 3. We'll get to that. God providing testimonials. Good. I need help with my computer. Okay, Joanne, I'll call you tomorrow. We'll work on that. Because I'm a computer tech guy. So I'm going to help somebody else with their computer too. So interesting, huh? Good stuff. Yeah.
One of my, Ruth and Esther, one of my two favorite books.
Yeah.
I just discovered.
Where's the name of God in the book of Esther?
It's not.
It is, actually.
Is it?
Uh-huh. Normally you'd say, well, the book of Esther does not have the name of God in it, but it does.
Where?
Well, if you have $20, I'll help you out. Tell you.
You take plastic?
Take plastic. It's in an equidistant lines number sequence or letter sequence. I forgot where, but it's Yahweh. It's encoded, and so the Jews would know to find the first Yod, and then count like 49 letters or 7 letters, and they would see Yahweh. It was encoded. Yeah. Yeah. The Jews would know things like that, where the unbelievers wouldn't. The Jews wouldn't say anything. Of course, not the average everyday Joe knew about this because they didn't have the Torah to read. They didn't have the scriptures. But those who studied this stuff, it was told to them, entrusted to them, look here, look here, look here. And so the Jews would recognize that certain pattern in Esther. I forgot where it is, but it's there. A Calvinator to help you, a Calvinator, fix it after you've been humbled. So we'll have to talk tomorrow, Joanne. We'll get it. We'll figure it out. Thanks, Matt, Charlie, Anik for her hospitality. Yeah, we got a nice full house tonight. Anybody else want to say anything? Any comments or anything?
Silent.
No?
Matt, did you say that kind of punishing the family of Naomi for dying all the men?
For killing them? Well, we don't know exactly. But one of the issues is that Elimelech was a Jew, and he's supposed to be covenantally faithful to the God of Judaism, to God, and he basically should stay in the land. And to leave the land is, in a sense, to leave the covenant of God, because God had promised the Jews the land and promised to take care of them. Even though there was a famine, they should basically, the idea is he should have stayed. So what he did was he went to another land, to the pagans, the Moabites, who served false gods. That's a problem. It's like the prodigal son who said, Father, I want all my inheritance now. Went to a foreign land, sold everything, wasted it. Your light's on, your battery can go. And so this kind of a thing. So some commentators hold to the idea that it might be that God let Elimelech die along with the sons die, so that it was a judgment upon them. It could also be that God wanted them to die so that Ruth would go back with Naomi and be in the line of Jesus. And it could be one or the other or both, and combinations of other things as well. We have to understand the providence of God, that there are going to be things we just do not understand, and that's okay. God's big, God's omniscient, God's omnisapient. Omnisapience is all wisdom. He has all knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom is the proper use of knowledge, and God has that, so he's always knowledgeable. So nevertheless, back to that, it might have been, some might have considered it a curse. It could have been a judgment from God. God could have used that sin of them to bring in something else. God's always one step ahead, always 5 steps ahead. Maybe 7 is a biblical number. That answer? Okay. I'm sorry?
I remember the Arabic greeting.
You remember the what?
Arabic greeting. Salam
Oh,
alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. That's right.
Alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam. That's right. And I remember. Salam alaikum and then alaikum salam. Yep, that's right. Lord be with you, Lord be with you too as well. Yeah. Thank you. That's right. There's a lot of Muslims in Albania, right? Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, any more comments or questions? Let's see if anybody has anything to say in here. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. No big deal. All right. You guys want to talk about anything else besides this? Any theological issue? Any other thing that's going on? Says Matt to himself. I ask these questions. You should see. I mean, people who are watching, everybody's doing this, and except the girls, they look good. But come on. And Dave back there is looking really bad.
Yeah.
I get back at him. He insulted me right away when he got in. It was pretty good too. So I got to get back. It was taking me several to earn back to that one. That was good. You can't call me a heretic, Vicky says. So no comments? Any questions? Anything in the chat room? You know, how come you guys don't have any questions? Or did you learn anything? What'd you learn?
Beat the question.
Repeat the question. Okay, what I suspect happens is you're exposed to different things as you went through, but you can't really repeat them all, right? That kind of thing.
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
No, it's I was harking back to for somebody did a name study with that Ruth and found that she ended up in the genealogy of Christ with that. I never picked that up before.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, excuse me.
yeah, that opened up doors for me when I started to read that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Bible's full of incredible things. I could do a Bible study and show you some of those incredible things.
Then let's see, what was the other one? The I forgot her name. The woman that was in Jericho. That was another one that was interesting with that when they showed
I've been to Jericho too.
I would love to see it actually. But no, the woman that they that the two Jewish scouts sold.
Yeah.
Rahab.
Rahab, thank you.
Yeah, that was the other one too, where you was kind of doing like a word play with that, and I found out that there was a Rahab used differently with that, because I came across a reference where it says it dashed across the rocks. I was like, it can't be the same person, but it's not. And that where I was reading, it seemed it's a reference Egypt.
What? Okay, where? Oh, in 1 Corinthians 10?
I think where it says that
The rock followed them.
That used like Rahab, and it's like dash against the rocks. Like, well, wait a minute, that can't be the same person. That, but it was referencing something else.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's
All right.
what opened the door. And I think that's what I heard you on the radio saying that words have context. So
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. So are you learning through this? You enjoying this? Because you don't seem to. Man, how's it going? They just stare at me. They don't do anything. Like, whatever. I think they come for the cookies and the grapes and the
We
Halloween
didn't have a
candy.
lot of Halloween candy.
You didn't?
We just came here.
We were told there were sandwiches, so.
You told her sandwiches? What women?
That reminds me.
And also the bad jokes that
I
I.
need to show you a video.
Yeah.
Too,
Okay.
involving sandwiches.
Oh, involving what?
Oh, yeah,
Sandwiches.
yeah.
Sandwiches?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Is it good? It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Probably get in trouble. Can a person not believe in eternal salvation but still be saved? Yes. If a person believes they can lose their salvation, would that not mean they depend on their works to not lose their salvation? Not necessarily. Amish potato. Interesting. That's his name, the Amish potato. Because people can believe in different levels of salvation and not believe they earn it by their works, but that it's possible to lose by their negation or their rejection, and not maintain it by their works, that it's maintained by God, but that they can throw it away. That's what the Lutheran position would be. Joanne says Albania has nice cups too.
Yes, they do.
That's right. We love those cups.
Man, can you go back to like the first question with that, with eternal security?
Eternal security? Uh-huh.
What was the question again? Can a person believe in
Eternal
security?
salvation, but not, and still be saved. Not believe in eternal security.
How does that work?
By being inconsistent. People believe all kinds of things inconsistently.
Okay.
So as a matter of fact, a guy wanted to challenge me, an Eastern Orthodox guy, about 4 nights ago, said, "But I want to debate you." I said, "Okay, what do you want to debate on?" He said, this, or this. I go, "You pick." He goes, "No, you pick." I said, "No, you pick. Just pick which one you want to debate." He said, "Okay, eternal security." I said, "Okay." I said, "Can I ask you a question? Can I speak in John 6:44? Yes, I can." So I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And we went to John 6:39, where Jesus says, "This is the will of the Father is that Jesus lose none." I said, "Can Jesus lose any?" "Yes." And you can just imagine how the conversation went.
How did he justify that?
He justified it by saying that the will of the Father is that everyone come to salvation in intertrinitarian communion, that what happened before the foundation of the world. And when he says the will of the Father, what it really means the will of the Father is that everyone gets saved, but not everyone will be saved. So that's why that they can lose their salvation.
I need that to keep my head from exploding.
Yeah.
Well, I think Arthur used the same kind of.
Same kind of logic?
I was listening to with like the last sponsorship with that, but I was listening to another debate with you and Eastern Orthodox guys.
Yeah, Cabane.
Yes, that was mind numbing with that, because I was listening to that word.
He didn't
like a medical feeling with that. It's like I need to stop because my charges.
Yeah, Eastern Orthodox guy. He thought he was doing so well, going to do so well, and he didn't. There were just things in the text he couldn't answer.
And he just flat ignored, because you asked.
Yeah.
You went and said, "Okay, we'll read this." Jesus wept. Would you?
Because in the context, John 11:35, he's saying this. They would say to me, "I don't have the authority to interpret the word of God." And I'd go to John 11:35. Jesus wept. Go ahead.
And he said, "Well, what does that say?" And he wouldn't. He wouldn't acknowledge it. He went on this long ramble with that, and it made no sense. But
can you hear them talking in the room? Yeah, because they'll say, "I don't have the authority." So I go to John 11:35. Jesus wept, and I say, "I'm going to interpret this. What I think it means is that he wept. That's my interpretation. Am I correct?" And they say, "Well, yeah." I said, "Oh, I don't need church authority to get that right, do I?" And it's one of the things I'll do. John 11:35 is the shortest verse in the Bible, right?
Yes.
In the English, it is, but not in the Greek. I read it trivia one time, and in the Greek, there's actually a shorter verse. I forgot where it is. Yeah.
You mentioned you're going to debate someone on total depravity.
Total depravity. Yes.
yeah,
What is total depravity? Total depravity is a teaching that a human person is touched by sin in all areas of his makeup, her makeup, heart, soul, mind, body, spirit, emotions. Everything is touched by sin. Total depravity. It does not mean that they're as evil as they can be. It just means that no part of them has escaped the touch of sin. And then the effect of total depravity is found in various verses. In fact, someone asked me to explain John 6:44, which ties into this. And so John 6:44, Jesus says, "No one can come to me unless the Father draws them." So total depravity, the effects of total depravity would be that the unbeliever is a slave of sin, Romans 6:14-20, a hater of God who doesn't do any good, doesn't seek for God, Romans 3:10, 11, and 12. He's dead in his trespasses and sins, Ephesians 2:1, by nature child of wrath, Ephesians 2:3. His heart's desperately wicked and deceitful, no man can trust it, Jeremiah 17:9. And so and he cannot receive spiritual things, 1 Corinthians 2:14. So because of this, it's necessary then that God draw us. You cannot come to me unless the Father draws you. Because if it's up to their free will, libertarian free will, not compatibilist free will, but up to libertarian free will, then they should be able to just freely come to God on their own. Total depravity says no, they're touched by sin in all areas of their life, and the effect of that sin upon them is their incapacitation, in the sense that they cannot freely choose to do what is good because they're slaves of sin. Choosing God is good. Then we get into libertarian free will versus compatibilist free will, and there's some discussions on that. And so that's why John 6:44, Jesus says, no man, you can't come to me unless it's granted you from the Father, or excuse me, that no one can come to me unless the Father draws you. That's John 6:44. And John 6:65, you cannot come to me unless it's been granted to you from the Father. So the Father has to give it to you to come to Christ. And what I'll do is I'll bring these verses up, and if anybody's going to give this to the guy debating on total depravity, by all means, give it to him. And I'll ask these verses about stuff like this. There's a guy on the web. I got to talk to him again. What's his name? He's kind of a well-known guy, and but I am with names. And he's an open theist, I think. I'm trying to remember his name. I'll get it later. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And nice guy, but he actually speaks out purposely. Christian guy speaks out purposely against Calvinism, and he should not do that because he's causing division in the body of Christ. Leighton Flowers is his name.
Yeah.
So Leighton and I had a discussion once, went to Philippians 1:29, and I said, the Bible says here that God grants that we believe. Now, why would God have to grant that we believe? He grants that we believe because of total depravity and the effects of total depravity. And I said, this shows total depravity is true. And he said, no, it means that God grants us the opportunity to believe. He actually altered the text to make it fit his theology. That's a sign of total depravity. In fact, I say to people, the fact that you deny total depravity proves it's true.
I was listening to a discussion you had with Sean McCraney on the.
Nice, Sean.
And that makes the day go by fast.
Is he still preaching, by the way?
I don't know, but he's gone off the deep, and he's actually now writing his own Bible, correcting the Bible.
Oh,
And yeah, he's woo.
On the one I listened to with it's like a couple years ago with that, but he was saying if a person wanted, didn't believe in Christ or women pastor, and then he goes Mormon, Catholic, if you want to be baptized or not, he goes, it's all fine, whatever goes with that. And it was really
Yeah, he's a heretic.
um,
And I've told him. Yeah, he knows.
yeah. But that was interesting because he had you talk precisely total depravity.
Yeah, he and I did 5 hours on total 5 points, and he was not able to refute them. People can't refute them. What they will do is add stuff into this text or modify the text in order to make it fit.
Or not even address your question. Like he
Or
wanted
not
to ramble and didn't answer any of your questions.
Yeah.
Even-
Most of it,
Call it ramblation. That's what I call it.
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
most of it was, well, how do you know? Don't preach to me. How do you know?
Oh yeah, that one. That's another one.
It's an epistemological issue.
It was really interesting because it's almost like he was using it to kind of pick your brain more than anything.
Because he did one with James White shortly after,
Mhm.
and it seemed that he was just trying to get ammunition. Because he did like his own podcast after that, just attacking Calvinism and everything with that. He's not. He wasn't
Yeah, people should not attack Calvinism. This like I don't attack Arminianism. It causes unnecessary division in the body of Christ. You don't need to do that. People think, it's like Calvinism's evil. I know Calvinists who say Arminianism's evil, and they say Arminianism's a false gospel. Come on, stop, Oh, look at that. Tulip Week notes. Oh, look at that. I didn't even know I had that. I did. Yeah, actually, if you go to YouTube, I did 5 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I did the 5 points, and I didn't take any calls on the radio, and I didn't have any radio breaks. I just did an hour going through each point, and then I took them, and then I went through and I added slides into the video so you could see the scriptures and see everything. Have you? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have all that downloaded and saved on YouTube.
Good.
That and then your one on basic, it's from 2013, Basic Christian Theology.
Basic Christian theology. Yeah.
That and no, but the series you did on the tulip, that was awesome. That really clarified things.
Actually, Dave over there looking at his phone. How much do you love Reformed theology?
Good.
He sounds really excited
Oh,
about it.
no, yeah. Hey, watch this. Watch this, everybody. Watch Dave. Okay, right. Hey, Dave, guess what? God predestined. Pavlovian, here we go. God predestined us for the foundation of the world in Jesus Christ because we're not good enough to be saved. And only the grace of God brings us to salvation through the atonement of Jesus Christ, God in flesh, right? By his sovereign predestination and election. See, he's not doing what normally does. Oh, yeah. That's what he normally does.
Well, I'll be honest, like when I first started researching Reformed theology, I didn't like it at first. With that,
I didn't either.
It was,
Does anybody like it?
That's just shows total depravity is true. Yeah. Yeah. Mix it, Calvin.
you know, but that like for me, that always I don't think I still don't fully understand, but it makes more sense now. Like Jacob and Esau with that, and I was listening to Jeff Durbin, and he said he did it, his own theory in Calvinism. He said something interesting. He said, "Well, the question shouldn't be why God, chose like one over the other." He said the question you should ask is why didn't he choose anyone to begin with? Because they both deserve the same thing, and that's kind of where the light bulb went on with that. It's like, oh, okay, now.
There's an illustration by Lorraine Bettner in his book, The Reformed Doctrine of Predestination. And he gave a really interesting illustration, and I'll mess it up a little bit, exact details, but the point is, he says, picture a prison, and they're prisoners, and they all deserve a death penalty. And a person with incredible power and riches and resources is able to go in and redeem, buy them out, and have their debts paid for, and they can escape prison. So let's say there's 100, and he picks 10, and he just does that. Well, the questions come up: why did he pick 11? Well, why didn't he pick 9? Because of his good nature, he could do what he wants, and that's what it is. And people say, well, that's not fair. And they start complaining about grace. They say, no, you ought to do this. And what they do is get legalistic about grace. Grace is the undeserved favor, and yet people say God ought to be gracious to everybody. Who are you to say to God what he should be doing? The fact is, like you're saying, that the miracle is that he's gracious to any. You don't want fairness from God. I do not want what's fair from God. I don't want that.
That's the thing.
I want grace.
I used to say like early on with this, like, I want justice, and all of a sudden the light bulb went on. It's like, well, wait a minute. No, I don't want his justice. I want his mercy.
Yeah.
Because the light bulb went on.
Oh, no, I want grace instead of mercy. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Mercy is not getting what you deserve, but grace is getting what you don't deserve in a good way. I just don't want to just be absent from what I deserve, just not happening. I want even more given to me.
Right.
That's what I want, God's grace. Oh, yeah. Grace. I don't want it infused into my soul through the sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church that has the priesthood authority that controls my salvation. I don't want that. I want Jesus. Yeah. So somebody was going to ask me a question, and there he goes, hey, can I ask you a question? Rabbit was, 6 days of creation, does it mean 24 hours for each day, or is it open to interpretation? Whenever you say something is open to interpretation, the answer is yes, it's open to interpretation. Some people say that one day for God could be 1,000,000 years for us. Yeah, it's possible. He says one day is 1,000, 1,000's one day, years. But we have to be careful, because generally what happens is 6 days, and on the seventh day we rest, and we rest on the seventh. The general idea out of the Old Testament is that it means 24-hour period. generally speaking. But it's probably closer to 23 hours and 56 minutes. Because the day is 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds. And that shift didn't really start until around 702 BC. Before then, all the calendars around the world were 360 days, which is why we get 360 degrees. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so it probably was 24-hour periods, but it could be longer, but gets into some really interesting discussions about that.
Isn't that the first reference? I'm asking a rhetorical question to an actual 24-hour day.
Well, here's the thing. I raised this objection to someone who said it has to be 24 hours days. I'm not saying it is or is not. I said, if that's the case, then when it says a day, how can you have a day when there is no sun and at night and dark at the first day? And he goes, that's a good question. And he's a literal 6-day creationist. I basically lean that way too.
But that's a good question.
But it's a good question. I said, why? If day is defined by the light and the darkness, how can you have the first day without that being there?
You have to define day then.
You have to define day, so you have to define it from later context and import it there. Is it legit? And there's also what's called the framework hypothesis, which not many people accept. But day 1 is creating light. Day 4, because it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1 and 4, 2 and 5, 3 and 6. Let there be light, created the sun. Day 1 and day 4. Let the plants, the land, and then the plants. And it was a parallel called the framework hypothesis. And it's just some, it's just another thing.
Do you still have like the article of the atheists that described what a person would see when the earth was being formed?
Oh, that's you heard me talk about that?
Yeah, it was on a radio show when
Yeah.
I first started listening to you, and
Yeah.
that blew my mind because you said it's like, he was an atheist, didn't buy into it, but what he described, what you would see, which is mind blowing with it, because it matched what was in Genesis as far as like
Right.
what you would see with the creation.
Yeah, what had happened was years before I became a Christian, I had a Bible and I was reading through the first chapters because I was basically an agnostic, a kind of semi-atheist agnostic, whatever, who believed in science, and I wanted to become a scientist, a marine biologist, and all that kind of stuff. And I took the Bible and I read the first couple of chapters. I went, forget that. It's just not scientifically accurate because you don't create light and then sun later. The arrogance of a 15, 16-year-old. And so later I read an article by a scientist who said, what would you see from the Earth's perspective of the evolution of the planet? Well, that's interesting. I'll read that. And it was the same description that you'd see in Genesis. And I went, and I said, that can't be a coincidence. It freaked me out. You'd see light, but not the sun. The photosynthesis could occur before the sun is there. Plants could before the sun. How could that be? Well, because all you need is photosynthesis. Diffused light works. And I went back and I went through it, read it slowly. Wait a minute, something's up here. And that's what first got me going, oh, let's look at this differently. Yeah. I don't tell that story very often, but yeah, that's the case. And so he says, Mr. Rabbit Dude said, that's what his name is, Mr. Rabbit Dude. In God's time or our time, when referring to 24-hour period, can't answer the question because we don't know what God's time is like. And so because of that, we can't say this is what it would be. It's like someone saying God exists outside of time. I say, well, what does it mean? They go, I don't know. Well, then don't say it. He exists outside of time. Do you know what it means to exist out of time? No. Can you relate to it? No. So is that what God is in? Of course. Well, how would you know if you don't know what it is? I say to Christians, so don't say God's outside of time. Just say he relates to time differently than we do. There's what's called the A theory of time, the B theory of time. The A theory is it's sequential. The B theory says it's all simultaneous. Does God move? Do we move through a simultaneous essence of time? Or does actual events occur? There's only one true thing called now.
Our brain shuts down.
We actually have discussions like this. I do these discussions. There are things I discuss that I can't even talk to you guys about, not because you're dumb or anything, not that. It's just there's background stuff, and it's without knowing it, a lot of the conversations don't make any sense. And so I enjoy those conversations. I get up there and we get into like one guy today. He was in the chat during the break. I said this. Empiricism is an epistemological means. Epistemology deals with the theory of knowledge. So one of the ways of knowing things is called empiricism, which is looking at and judging things by your experience, by your senses. So I judge truth by my senses. And I asked this guy, did you use empiricism to arrive at empiricism?
Oh,
Because it's begging the question, and it's a logical fallacy. Okay, but then they'll say, well, you presuppose God's existence. Here, I'll have some fun with you. I'll tell you what I do. They'll say, well, you presuppose that God exists, and you're begging the question too. And I say, you're correct. I do beg the question by assuming the truth of God's identity. I presuppose his identity and the truth of the Christian God. Well, that's just circular reasoning. I'll say, you're absolutely correct. God says he's true, and I believe it because he said it. And I said, the question then becomes, which worldview can account for the circularity? You see, I can have a terminus in the mind of God. Why do morality exist? Why do we exist? How do we know about logic and rationality? What's the foundation by which these things could be justified? Well, you can give me a foundation. What's the foundation of that foundation? What's the foundation of that foundation? You can only go back so many times before you get to what's called a terminus. If there is no terminus, if you don't have a terminus, you can't have any justification. Because if there is no reason for, say, a moral absolute, some people are what's called moral objectivists. They say there's actually moral truths that are just out there as abstract objects, which is another discussion. And they'll say they're just out there, they exist, and we come in contact with them, kind of like Platonic norms, another discussion, which has to do with transcendentals and immaterial actualities, another discussion. And so they'll say, well, no, he's out there. I say, well, what's the foundation of your norms or your transcendentals? What must be in place in order for that to be in place? Then they'll give me that explanation. Well, what must be in place for that to be in place? So I can keep going back and back. And it's like this. If you have a dominoes, it's infinitely long in both directions, and they're falling. But if it's been falling for an infinite amount of time, that means there is no beginning. But that means you can't ground the actuality of them falling. There's no grounding for it because there's no initial cause, no terminus. So if you can't get back to the initial cause, how do you have events occurring? It's a philosophical conundrum. So if you can't ultimately ground your reasoning for a certain intellectual justification in a discussion, you don't have a terminus, then you can't justify anything. It goes back infinitum ad nauseum. In Christianity, what we do is we define God as the biblical revelation. I'll say he is the eternal being who exists. Oh boy, I'm going to do this to you guys. Let's see if I can find it. I'm going to do this. I'm just going to have fun with you guys. Let's see. Oh, it's deactivated. Let's see if I can even find it. We talk about I want to define God. So give me a second. And I'll show you what I've been working on. And the issue of discussions, and if I can find it within 15 seconds, I will. If not, I won't bother. I'm not going to waste time. But, okay, don't have it. All right. Sorry, I just coughed into the mic, just killed everybody's ears. So the issue here, books and manuals by books and outlines. Here we go, found it. So this has to do with apologetics. So hopefully it'll all be in there. Outlines, preparing. I don't have it listed in here. Doesn't matter. So what I do is I have a paragraph that's this long on God. God is the eternal being that possesses a aseity, which means he is not dependent upon anything. He always has existed. And that he's always existed as three simultaneous persons. This is the Christian God, and that there's nothing against which he could be compared, and there's nothing greater than him by which he can be judged. This is important in Christian theology. So therefore, by definition, out of the revelation of Scripture, we have God as the terminus. So if I were to say to you, this water glass proves that the Trinitarian God exists, you'd say, no, it doesn't. I say, yeah, it does. Because everything that exists in a context. And contexts and actualities, because the glass's existence is an event, but events are caused. So you go back in time, what causes this, that causes that causes the truck to bring it, that causes the people to heat it, that causes the whatever, and you go back and back. Well, that's because the continent exists here, because they could do that. Where'd the continent come from? Well, it's the earth. Where'd the earth come from? And we go back and back. Well, where'd the universe come from? And so you go back, well, where's the terminus? The terminus is with the Trinitarian God. That's why this proves that God exists, because you can't ground his existence infinitely back, but you can in the Christian Trinitarian sense. All things, therefore, demonstrate that God exists. And you can do all things that are abstract, all like thoughts, logical inferences. You can do all things that are actual, all things potential as well. This is actual, but it's potential that it could be over there. But it's not. So potentiality means that all potentialities can only exist ultimately in the terminus of the existence of the mind of God. So therefore, all things that exist ultimately demonstrate that the Trinitarian God exists. Why Trinitarian and not a Muslim God? I'm glad you asked me that. So the reason is because there is an issue. So there's a glass, here's a glass, and we have glasses up in the cupboard. So we have multiple instances. I'll slow down. Multiple instances of a glass, right? Here's a question. What unites them all as being a glass? Not glass as in its material, but we call it a glass that we drink out of. The drinking glass. What concept unites them, even though that one has a handle, this one does not?
Their function, glassness.
Function, glassness. Correct. Because their essence relates to the function. But function has to do with intention. So now we get into an abstract realm where we're talking about the abstraction that relates to the actuality. Wish I had discussions like this. I enjoy this stuff, okay? So what unites, I'll talk about the Trinity, what unites all these glasses as one kind of thing? We have particular instances of drinking glasses. What unites all the drinking glasses? What philosophical foundation unites them? If you say that there's an ontological essence of an abstract thing up there that's glassness, drinking glassness, then what's the foundation by which, in ethereal sense, it exists? And what unifies all of them? Because if they're particulars, they have to be particular instances of a single thing. But if it's a single thing that unifies them, and how can you have diversity if the single thing is one essence? How do you have one essence be also many particulars? And if it's many particulars, how do you justify it as one essence? You see the problem?
Yeah.
So in a monotheistic being, God, who's the terminus, like the God of Islam, this is called the problem of the one and the many. That's what this is called. The problem of the one, glassness, drinking glassness, and the many particular instances of glasses. Duck, ducks. Chairs, chairness, right? What is the common actuality that can be justified that defends and unites the idea of particular manifestations, of particulars? So how is it that one essence can manifest in particular realms if it's just one thing is what nature is just one thing? How does one thing have particular manifestations? If nature is multiple, many, then how do you have a single unifying thing behind it? So the intellectual justifications, right? The God of Islam cannot account for the one and the many. Because God in Islam is a single Unitarian being. There is one, but there's no many. The Trinity, however, is one being with three persons, one and many in the essence of his nature. So in the one and the many problem can be solved through the postulation of the Trinitarian essence of God, who is the terminus of all things and all not all, because I can't solve all of them. I'm not bright enough to, but the one and the many issue has an answer inside the Trinitarian essence. And since there's nothing against which he can be compared, we can answer questions like this. How do you know God is good? Atheists will say, how do you know God is good? What they want me to do is say God, there's a standard of goodness that separates God, that's outside of God, and we judge God by that standard. Well, that's how you know he's good. Well, then there's something outside of God that's greater than God, isn't there, Matt? That's the idea. Called the Euthyphro Dilemma. And so I'll say, wrong. We know goodness because God reveals it out of his character. And what I do is I talk like this to the atheists and the agnostics, and I'll say, no, God is the. And as I did last night with a guy, and I actually said this to a guy last night, he said he had a proof that the Trinity was not true, and he didn't realize he was equivocating. He was intelligent, he's articulate, and he was also unwise at the same time. And what happened was, and I'll tell you this, what happened was he said, well, if for each X that is Y, and X is God and Y is particular of God, then therefore X and Y, therefore Jesus, who's supposed to be God, can't be the X. It went on like this. And I don't remember exactly, I had it written down, but I've lost it. And I said, well, how do you define God? Because God is a Trinitarian sense, and the word God can be used in God is a Trinity, or Jesus is God, but you don't say Jesus is a Trinity. But you're saying the second sense, God means the divine quality and divine essence. Then what he tried to do was say, well, the divine essence is Trinitarian, so therefore he's a Trinity, right? You try to do this. I say, you're equivocating again. He goes, no, you're not. And he got really upset. And he says, is it true that God is a thing? And I said, define what you mean by thing. And he said, well, a thing is anything that exists. I said, doorknob? A doorknob is God? He goes, no, you idiot. I'm talking about God. No.
Anything.
You said, that's exactly what I said. You said anything. And he goes, no, in the context of divine, God is a thing. I said, define thing. He goes, I told you what it means. Well, what does it mean? Anything that exists. Well, then I'm a doorknob. And he goes, and he kicked me out of the room. He goes, I'm going to ban you, because he had the authority to do that. And they asked me to come back in. And so he bans me again, right? Because I kept doing this to him. And then at one point I said, could you do me a favor? Can you do me a favor? And he goes, you know, I said, I want you to look behind you. Wherever you're standing, just look behind you. Look behind you and look down at your belt loop, you know, because it's down there. I said, I want you to look behind. I said, I want you to do that. And I want you to do, and everybody in the room's like, what are you talking about? I said, I want you to just kind of take your fingers and pull out the belt a little bit, the pants a little bit. I want to see if your diapers are filled. And oh, he did not like that. But you're out of here. And at that time, they asked me to come back and go, no, I'm done. But, you know, it was ridiculous. These guys, they worked so hard at denying God. And I warned them. I said, Romans 1, 18 through 32, you got to understand that the judgment of God is upon you for your refusal to believe in him. And each time you work against him, the judgment of God upon you is your heart, that you are blinded. And you are blinded. You cannot see the truth of who Christ is and what the truth is. And I said, I've answered you, and you refuse to receive the answer because you hate God. But anyway, these are the kinds of discussions I have with people on a regular basis.
I missed the guy used to talk to on Bible thing when the realist, was it like the realist nihilist or something?
Nihilistic realist,
Yeah,
realistic
something
nihilist,
like
yeah, something like that, yeah.
You guys used to go in circles with that, and he
Uh-huh.
just would not.
They don't want to.
But he thought that he was like the greatest thing since sliced bread with that he had outslicked this, Reverend Slick with that. But no, it was heartbreaking with that, because it's like he was just blinded to it.
Oh, absolutely. What I've said to atheists before, I said, we've had our discussions now for 2 hours, and I brought you to a place where you can't answer anything further, and you just argue in circles now. I can go further than you can. I can go further. It's like Arminianism, Calvinism on the road of information. The Arminianism can go 20 feet. The Calvinist can go 25. The roads are infinitely long. We can go further. The atheist is still stubbing his toe on the start line. And they think that they have all this knowledge, all this wisdom, but they don't, because they cannot ground their knowledge. They cannot justify their epistemological issue. So let me tell you, some of the things that they have come up with, there's objective, the terms. I'm trying to remember some of them. But I was actually going through my philosophy outline and trying to add more definitions. I'll jump around and do this outline, do that outline. And so now what I've gotten into the habit of doing with atheists and with others, they'll give me a term and I'll say, can you explain the term? I thought you knew this, Matt. Well, I think I do, but maybe I don't. I want to know exactly what it is you mean by this. I'm going to write it down. So you said this, that. And I always use it against them. Not because I'm looking to trap them, but because they have a definition. And I say, well, I love doing this. Oh, here's the note. Propositions. A proposition is an immaterial, non-transcendent truth holder. So I've had people argue with me and say, Matt, you don't need to have transcendentals because we have propositions. Because the laws of logic are universal abstractions. I can get into that if you guys want. And so they'll say propositions are the truth bearers of the things of which the laws of logic are. My first time I heard this, I go, let me write this down. Okay, write this down. So you're saying they're truth bearers. They're the propositions are non-material, they're not transcendent, but they're actualities that are the bearers of truth.
They work so hard.
Oh, they work real hard.
Because
Right. But let me continue on it. So I said, okay, can I ask you questions about this? I said, what are some of the characteristics of these truth-bearing propositions? We don't know. So you don't know what it is, and you want to argue from a perspective that you can't define what it is. I said, this is what you are offering me? And I said, and I went and did research the next day, and I found there's 3 major schools of thought on proposition theory. One is called the Phrygian one, and another one, Russellian, anyway. And so I go, which one of these are we going to go with? Because no matter which one they pick, I'll go, how do you know that's the right one?
they don't.
And we go in circles again. And I say, you guys don't have a terminus. I do. Rest in God. God reveals truth. Truth is that which corresponds to his mind. And because he knows all things, all possible events, as well as all actual events. Okay, you want me to get into universal abstractions and the laws of logic now?
Yeah.
Do you? Okay, watch this. Okay. All right, here we go. Now I'll go slowly because Dave's here. And I'll go slowly. And
He insulted you.
I'm trying to catch up with the good one that he got me with right away. And so I think he's ahead. But we always insult each other. That's good stuff. All
When
right.
the insults stop, that's when I get nervous.
Okay, so I'll introduce you another apologetic concept. And believe it or not, I actually talk about these things on a semi-regular basis. So this is what I've been doing this for years. All right, now, with some people. So we have the laws of logic, the 3 basic laws of logic. Law of identity. Something is what it is and is not what it is not. This is a glass. It is not an airplane. It is what it is, and it's not what it's not. The law of excluded middle. Yeah. The law of excluded middle says statements are either true or false. This is a glass. True. This is an airplane. False. All right. The law of non-contradiction is the second one, and I got thrown here. The law of identity is the first one. The second one's a law of non-contradiction. A statement cannot be both true and false at the same time in the same sense in the same way. You cannot say, for example, this is a drinking glass. It's also the case that it's not a drinking glass. Both those statements cannot be that way.
Glasses. Yeah.
Yeah, function and abstract function, ideology, yes. And so that's what a statement is. So when we get into the issue of the law of excluded middle, statements are either true or false. Then we have the law of proper inference. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. So if A equals B, A equals B, and B equals C, then A equals C. Okay? So we have these basic laws that we work with. And some say there's 2, some say there's 3, some say there's more, some say there's one basic one, and they get into this stuff. I'm just giving you the basics. All right. Now we ask the question, what's the nature of these laws? Well, that's hard to say because all we can really do is describe the properties of the laws. So the property of this glass, for example, is hardness, transparency. It has a certain volume. It has certain mass and density. And just as that glass there as the glassness, So we recognize the ontos of something by the properties. What is humanity? Humanity is an essence, and the properties of humanity are self-awareness, awareness of others. So yeah, God bless. Self-awareness, awareness of others, being able to recognize, think, things like that. All right. What's that? I'm hearing noises.
Annie,
Oh, Nick's talking. Tell like it's coming from you with a girl's voice, which is why it's echoing off the wall, coming right there. I'm going, that's weird. Because that's a guy. And I'm losing it. Yes. That's what happens when you talk about abstractions. So the laws of logic are the foundations of rational thought. So if you can't justify your rational thought with the laws of logic, then you can't justify yourself as being correct. If anything you're saying violates the law of logic, then what you're saying is not true.
It's smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors, Democrats.
That's
So
Biden.
leftists, and they do, very seriously, they abide in lack of logic, lack of understanding identity, and then very nature of truth itself. And because they don't rest in absolutes, they rest in a realm of relativism. And relativism can only work in a real solid world. Because if relativism is true, nothing is true. But if nothing is true, then that's an absolute truth about relativism, which refutes relativism. But it's okay because it'll work in it. Anyway, so the transcendental argument for God's existence is that the universality, the laws of logic exist. We all touch them. We all apprehend them. We all use them. We can identify improper thought. You know, mom and dad and brothers and sisters and husbands and wives will say, that's not true. You just said you contradicted yourself. We're identifying a problem based on the law of logic called the law of non-contradiction. So let's use this law of non-contradiction, which we're pretty familiar with. Why is it that the law of non-contradiction applies to you and you and me and you and you and you and you and the people on the other side of the world and the people in the International Space Station? Why? What must be the case that the laws of logic apply to everyone? It's a serious question. What must be the case for their truth value to have its truth valueness and universal applicability? Now, the laws of logic are abstractions. Now get this. Something is what it is not what is not. That's A equals A. That's the law of identity. Keep saying and it's throwing me off. I'm hearing sound, and it throws me off. I just thought, my brain goes, I'm hearing voices, and so A equals A is the law of identity. Something is what it is not what is not. But it's a universal truth principle. Why is it a universal truth principle? And why is it that it works for everybody? Why is that? The thing is, the law of identity is not found under rocks. Just like the law of non-contradiction, or the law of excluded middle, statements are all true or either true or false, or the law of proper inference. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. You don't find that truth in this glass. You don't find it under a rock. You can't take a photo of it. And because you cannot photograph these, weigh them, measure them, capture them in any way, therefore, they are not of this material world. They're not dependent upon the physical world. Therefore, they have transcendent properties. They exist, and they exist in a way not dependent upon the world. Because if they're properties of the world, when the world disappears, the properties disappear. But properties are measurable. Hardness or redness, or like those grapes, which are dark purplish, purpleness is an accidental property, not an essential property. The accidental property means redness, or a banana can turn from yellow to brown, and it's still a banana, but has an accidental property of color that can change. And so when you talk about these universals, like the laws of logic, they're not dependent upon the physical world, therefore they're independent of the physical world. If the physical world disappears, they don't disappear because they're not properties of the physical world, because properties are measurable. They're not physical properties. Therefore, they're not dependent upon the physical realm. So if the universe is gone, they're still there.
So that's why in your debates, you'll usually ask if, if humanity were to cease, with the laws of logic still.
Yeah, people ask me that. If humanity ceases to exist, do the laws of logic cease? The answer is no. They're not dependent upon human minds because human minds are different. What you may think is a logical necessity, I may not agree with. Which mind is correct? Because there are laws of logic that exist that our minds apprehend. Why can they apprehend? The Christian theology can at least propose an idea. We're made in the image of God, think his thoughts after him, and that's why. So when we talk about these transcendentals, another quality about them is that they're abstractions. They occur here. So if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C is a process here. And I can codify it, I can write it down, and I can speak it. But it's an abstraction. And it's a universal abstraction. And it's a transcendent universal abstraction, right? Are there any abstractions without a mind? No. If you have a universal, absolute, invariant abstractions, doesn't that imply a universal, invariant mind? God. You see?
What's the name of the guy in the Bible thing went where you guys, he was from England, where he went over the whole equals C type of thing with that. He wasn't a believer with that, but he had studied that philosophy.
Uh-huh.
Forget his name.
I forgot too. But a lot of the atheists will study this stuff, that's particularly the transcendental argument for God's existence. And they work really hard at trying to refute it by saying that propositions can account for the universals. Now you understand what I'm saying, right?
Mhm.
But then what justifies the propositions as being true, and which school of thought are you going to go with, and why is that the correct one? And whatever reason they give me, they're presupposing the laws of logic to do that. So what justifies your presupposition in that? Because if you don't use it, it becomes incoherent. What we agree. Well, you do the same thing when you presuppose God. That's true. But God's my terminus, and so therefore I have a starting point with him, but you don't. What justifies your logic? Well, the laws of logic. So you use the laws of logic to justify the laws of logic? That's circular. Because that means you presuppose the laws of logic to use the laws of logic. That's circularity. You don't get anywhere.
Chasing your tail.
Chasing your tail, you're a squirrel on a wheel.
Well, they don't have any basis for laws of logic. They have to jump into our worldview.
Now that's a whole other point. Very good. In order to argue, they have to jump into our worldview. We call it taxi cab apologetics. They're driving along. They don't like what's saying. They get stop, get out. They go for a long. They get back in when it doesn't suit them. This is why I'll say to them, if you're going to argue the Christian God, then argue the Christian God. Don't argue something else. I'm not going to argue in support of anything else. Well, I'm just talking about God generically. I'm not. They'll say, no, I want to talk about God, a generic idea of God. Go ahead. You're not talking with me about it because I don't believe in that. You want the Christian concept? Okay. But if you want to argue about any other God, I'm going to agree with you, Mr. Atheist, that there's no support. Forget it. I agree with you. But that's the thing. We only argue with the Trinitarian God. That's the position. And they'll say, well, Matt, imagine that the Christian God doesn't exist. Impossible. That's not the Christian God then. He necessarily must exist. So are you going to argue the Christian God or not? And they don't like it when you talk like this.
No, because they can't answer the question.
You can't, no terminus for them.
I had a conversation with a friend when he was an atheist, and he was saying can't know anything for certain. And so I asked him, and I said, he goes, so you know things for certain? I said, yes, I'm a man. I'm in Idaho. He goes, how do you know? And then he asked, how do you know that God exists? I said, by his revelation. And
He said, well, let's back up. He said, you can't know anything for certain, right?
that's what he said. He goes,
So you know that for certain.
That's what I was
It's a
say.
self-refuting statement. But
I
you
asked
don't
him.
go any further because the statement refutes itself. It's not true. You don't base an argument based on something that's false.
I asked him, and I can't remember how I did this, but I got him to admit it with his own words with that, because he said he couldn't know anything for certain with that. And so he was skeptical, and I said, well, I have one question for you. are you skeptical of your skepticism?
Exactly right.
And he got mad. I was over his house with, with his girlfriend and everything. He goes, I think you need to go home now.
What a trained skeptic apologist will do is say skepticism is okay even about itself. And because skepticism is a philosophical position that you can't really know anything for sure. And so we generically understand and accept it as a faith issue that kind of are argued like that. And I'll say, okay, so then what you're saying is you don't have any ultimate foundation for your reasoning, do you? So if you don't have an ultimate foundation, there's no terminus, then all you have is circularity. You don't get anywhere. It's nothing. It's arbitrary. It becomes arbitrary. Arbitrary means it's not based in any actuality, reality, or rationality. It's just something you whim. And I'll say, if it's arbitrary, I said, I'm not going to argue against your arbitrariness. That's just your position, your whim. And if you want to argue about it, go up to a wall and argue with the wall about your arbitrary decisions. Yeah. If you want to argue with me, I want to hear logic. Give me some rationality. These are the kinds of discussions I have on a regular basis, believe it or not.
I used to listen to a lot of the, there's still a lot of YouTube videos, but that's what I listened to first was the debates. Like the first one was like you and Aaron Robb, but then
That was easy.
I got onto the different discourses and everything that you were that I didn't even know existed, and I started listening to the back and forth, and that really blew my mind with it. I got because you said, well, if I presuppose that God exists, my worldview can account for things that yours cannot, and he said, such as, and he said, laws of logic, morality, rational thought. With that, and
Our
said,
existence.
And you said,
why women like guys.
Yeah, and I said, and he told me, he said, you have no basis for anything. No rational thought or anything else.
No justification, no terminus.
And that was like in 2013, 2014. That's when
when it hit.
Yeah, and it's like it's so refreshing to be at the job that I have now because I would listen to an 8, 9 hour or 10-hour workday would go by like that because I'm listening to podcasts one after another. So it's refreshing to be able to do that again. It still blows my mind. I'm starting to get it. But
it takes some practice. But once you get it, oh man, you can clean people's clocks. Not that that's what you want to do and just look at another notch in your Bible, but you can undermine their rationality and say, now you need Jesus. Now you need the Trinity.
That's what I've started to do with some of my friends with that. And it's they get mad because a lot of my friends, they're not stupid. They're very intellectual. They just have no basis to justify it with it. And they don't like when a guy that's not that bright, like philosophically, then just ask the question like, well, how do you know what's your basis?
Right.
And to explain the difference between objective and objective with that. And they asked them, it's like, okay, so without God, what's your standard with that? What causes less harm and it feels good? Well, fine. I've just shot you and robbed you blind with that. How does that feel? I was like, well, what just happened? All I did is I used your worldview against you. I feel totally fine robbing you blind. And it's like, well, that's wrong. You have no basis to say that. And so, yeah, it's started to come together with that.
See, what if you want to argue about this kind of stuff, you can do it very politely, very gently, and surreptitiously by in your mind asking a question that you may or may not ask them, but you ultimately want to point them to is, what's the ultimate justification for that? The ultimate, why does this table, why is it not falling? Because it's on the carpet. Why is the carpet not falling? It's on the plywood. Why is the plywood not? It's on the cement, on the ground. Okay. Well, where'd the earth come from? Why is it not falling? I'm getting this.
It's a lot like when a little kid says, why?
Oh, yeah.
Why is that? And they just you could go on and on and on.
That's right. In a secular worldview, it will go on and on forever. In a Christian worldview, it has a terminus. It all goes back to the Trinitarian God, not just God, but the Trinitarian God, who can also be the necessary preconditions for all intelligibility and answer the one and the many and the issues that are related to certain other aspects, or I don't get into.
sort of started to use with it. Like, so there's so much to learn with that. But the last question, I don't want to get them mad with it, but it keeps the door open. Because I did have one friend, where we discussed objective versus subjective.
Yeah.
And that's where I told her, with that, I would never do this, but bam, and you shot you, rub your blind. And she goes, well, that's wrong. I said, how can you say that? And that's where she stopped and she said, and she kind of smiled. She said, what just happened? Well, they did. They took your worldview, your logic, used it against you. And then I turned and said, if I presuppose that gods exist, my worldview can account for things that yours cannot.
Right.
And that's what I said. And she sat there with that, and she goes, "You've given me a very powerful argument. You've given me a lot to think about." And it opened the door, and then
Good.
you get kind of like that invisible hand. Okay, that's enough for now. And then 3 weeks later, I have more questions, and I'll dialogue with them. But when it gets to where there was counsel, well, why this, why that, and it's like you're not interested in the discussion, and then I'll go. But it has
Right.
opened a lot of doors.
Yeah. And it can shut them too. But yeah, depends on the person.
Yeah.
Not intending to shut them. Here's another principle that relates to that. It's out of something that actually happened when I was in seminary. I was going to do a report, and I went and interviewed a New Ager. And so he was the owner, proprietor of a New Age store in a city. And I said, I asked him, we did an interview. I said, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm not here to make you look bad. I just want to ask questions, get your perspective. I said, I'm not going to bash you. He goes, okay. Then I'll answer your questions. We sat down for about an hour and a half, and I just wrote down notes. And I said, okay, thank you. And true to my word, I said, I really appreciate it. I'm going to take off now. And thank you. He goes, well, wait a minute. Before you go, I got to ask you something. He said, what'd you think of what I said? I said, well, first of all, I told you I wasn't here to argue. I had no problem arguing about it, discussing it. But if you say it's okay for me to respond to you, I'll tell you. He said, yeah, go ahead. I said, your problem is that your worldview of relativism, because what he had said was morality is whatever you want it to be. Reality is whatever you want it to be. You can create your own reality. And I said, all these things don't make any sense. And the reason they don't make any sense is because if the world was really like that, nothing would be true.
Right.
I said, if I believe that red lights were green and green lights are red, would you want to go driving with me? I don't create my own reality. I said, the only reason, this is the point, the only reason you can have your relativism, so to speak, work is because you live in a world that's not like that. That's the key. You can between the corners of the construction of reality, in those dark areas of those little lines of corners, you put your theology in there, in the shadows, where you don't understand that they can only exist because of the reality that's around you, which is absolute. So this is why you're so inconsistent. You don't see that your position can't work on its own. It only works inside of an absolute world, which refutes the relativistic idea in the first place. And he goes, wow, okay. Wasn't expecting that, but all right. I said, you want to talk about it some more? He goes, no, I'm good. And it's the same kind of a thing.
Yeah.
People who are relativists don't realize that the relativism can only work in an absolute world. Because if everything's relative, then the couch can now become a jet, and now it can fly to Brazil, and you're going to walk back on Thursday, which was yesterday. Right? Because, wait a minute, today's Thursday. No, it was yesterday. Maybe. All depending if you're wearing those boots, because you got to have sneakers instead, and then you got to have candy bars. So it's just relativism.
I like
Create your own reality.
the one thing, and I've used this before with that, the blue sleeps faster on Wednesday.
Blue sleeps faster than Wednesday.
And that's
Non
what
sequitur.
did you just say? And I
Mhm.
said, well,
Yeah.
that's essentially what you're saying.
Right.
And
I got that from Rod Rosenblatt.
and sometimes some of my friends they'll get back to me. Others, because they don't have a response, then that door's
Close.
that door's shut. Yeah, and it's usually
How about this one? People will say to me, give a verse, and they'll say, that could be interpreted any way you want. And I love doing that. Now what I do, I say, really? And they go, yeah, any way you want. And I said, no, I don't think I'm that good looking, but I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
And they go, what? Wait, what? I said, well, yeah, I don't think I'm that like that, but thanks. They go, what are you talking about? Well, I wouldn't say that about my wife.
You did on a radio show.
I've done this before to people because if something can be interpreted any way you want, then I can do that to you.
Yeah,
And they don't like that.
No.
It only works when it comes to scripture because they don't want to face what it really means. So I'll say, if everything's interpretable, then I can interpret whatever you want. I've done it before, like 2 or 3 minutes at a time on the web, and people go, "Well, you're an idiot. Why you can't understand what I'm saying?" Well, maybe if it's blue.
Yeah.
What are you doing? And then I tell them, "This is what I'm doing to you." I said, "Your own philosophy doesn't work." That's another one that's a fun one. You get to tweak them.
That's right. I miss some of the interactions that you used to in the Bible. I still remember some of the names. Ocean was one, and then they had a few with that where they come loaded for bear. They don't refute, Matt or anything else with that. And it's funny with that because I know it'll never happen with it, but I would just love to have someone do a dialogue, state their case, and then have a response, and then have them say, "Okay, my pride is wounded. Let me get back to you," and come back and say, and say, "You were right." With that,
I've had a few people say that.
Have you?
Yeah, but not very often. I've had people say, "Yeah, it makes me think." And what I'll do is I'll say, "Hey, you've asked me something I don't know how to answer. I'm going to see if I can research it." I'll do the same thing.
I appreciate that because in the difference, well, even with the Orthodox guy that he asked question, like,
Cabane.
yeah, and he said, I have the research side. Even with Sean McCraney, he said, "Well, I have the research side," and Sean was like, "That's what I love you about your brother." And with that,
Don't have an answer. Don't have an answer. You can't be expected to know everything. In fact, when I debated Shabir Ali, a well-known Muslim apologist, last month, and I gave him,
that one, yeah.
he said right away, he goes, I don't know how to respond to those. I haven't studied them. Well, to me, it's a fair response, but it also means in a debate that the arguments are still standing. You've not refuted them. And but it was fair, and I treated him fairly with that. I said, I understand that. That's fair to say, but to say 3 out of 4 of the arguments, But at any rate,
Shabir Ali one was good. We need to go, bro.
Yeah, probably should.
And then
okay.
I do want to show you something real quick.
I guess we should shut this down. Well, it's been 2 hours. Hopefully you guys, we're gonna shut it down. We'll continue to talk here because it's getting later, but stuff. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. And Christian Worldview Project from the Philippines. Hey, how you doing? And hope this was interesting. All the side dialogue as well. Do you like the new light that I've got? Here, watch this, folks. Someone sent me, and I got to thank them. Sent me a ring light. That's why you can see to my glasses. See the ring, and so you can do this. Watch this. I'm clicking with a hand control thing there. Oh man, that is bright. And then it goes different colors: blue, beigeish. Oh, that's white. Oh my
Hey, Matt,
goodness.
does that say Sephora on the back of
Or
it?
Avon?
Avon, Flora? No, I don't think so. It's actually used is designed for podcasts.
I've seen
Yeah.
seen like that.
Yeah. No, I'm too manly to be threatened by that.
Of course.
Even in salons.
What's that?
In salons.
A salon? They use them in salons, yeah.
So right now.
Oh. And they use mirrors in salons too. In Albania, they use them.
So what'll happen is when we come like next Thursday with that, the door won't open for us.
But big ones, not so.
Bigger ones than that, yeah. These are for, they're actually for doing podcasts because it gives you light on the phone. Which reminds me, that guy who won the trucker, did you hear about the trucker who
Yeah.
won?
Am I crazy?
He spent $153
Yeah.
on his first part of his campaign. And guess what he used to do his video for the television ad? A phone.
Really?
Yes, and he won a state's house.
A lot of
Said it,
people
see.
saying it's like goes to show how much waste there is in those campaigns.
Yeah.
A lot of waste. It's
Yeah.
not going to the campaigns.
Oh
It's
man.
going to the pockets.
But his what he said in the ad, I watched it today, like, you are dead on right. He nailed it. He's a trucker. He's a truck driver. Having to run for office, and he won. Spent $153 on it for the primary issue of his campaign, and I spent a little bit more after that, I think. But it was like, no stinking way. He's my hero. Anyway, so he used a phone, and it looked great. It, I thought it was a professional job. It's his phone. So anyway, oh, he wants you to pet him. That he's gonna no, you can't touch his ears.
Yeah, he's not happy.
He has
With his ears.
problems with his ears, but if you touch anything else, he'll. There you go. All right. Oh, he's gentle. One of our cats. All right, I guess we'll shut this down, everybody. Okay. Join in daily in the radio broadcast. That's right, Carmorgas. Hope you guys enjoyed this. And thanks, Vicky. God bless. All right, everybody. We'll see ya. Shutting it down.